Anchorage, Alaska, a city surrounded by towering mountains, endless forests, and a stillness that seems almost eternal. In the 1990s, life here moved quietly. Snow blanketed the rooftops, and the cold wind carried the smell of pine and distance. It was a place where people knew their neighbors, where families built steady lives amid the beauty and isolation of the far north. As dawn breaks over the Chugach Mountains, we see wide aerial shots of 1990s Anchorage. Snow-dusted highways snake through frozen neighborhoods. The camera glides over the University of Alaska Anchorage campus, students bundled in coats, walking briskly to class. The streets are calm, and life feels predictable. Safe. Among those students was Bonnie Craig, an 18-year-old freshman who had just begun her college journey. Born in 1976, Bonnie lived in Anchorage with her mother, Karen Craig, a woman described by friends as loving, resilient, and devoted to her daughter. Bonnie was known for being bright, responsible, and full of potential. The kind of young woman who made sure to call home if she'd be late, who balanced her studies and part-time job with quiet determination. It was September 28, 1994. The morning was cold, like so many others in Alaska. Bonnie left her home to attend her math class at the University of Alaska Anchorage. She planned to take the bus, her usual routine. But somewhere between home and campus, something happened. Bonnie never made it to class. Hours later, when she didn't return home, worry set in. Calls went unanswered. The city that had always felt peaceful suddenly seemed vast and frightening. Anchorage's beauty, its forests, its highways, its frozen rivers, now carried an unsettling silence. Somewhere out there, a mother's worst fear was becoming real. Before we continue with Bonnie's story, before we explore the investigation, the heartbreak, and the long road to answers, I want to ask you for something simple. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe that victims deserve to be remembered, take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps ensure that stories like Bonnie's are never forgotten. It gives voice to families who have waited too long for justice. And if, for any reason, you choose not to subscribe, that's okay, but I genuinely want to know why. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback shapes how these stories are told. Truthfully, respectfully, and with heart. This is the story of Bonnie Craig, a young woman with dreams of her own, a mother who refused to give up, and a mystery that haunted Anchorage for nearly 2 decades. Anchorage in the early 1990s, a city on the edge of wilderness. Anchorage in the early 1990s was a city balancing two worlds, modern life and the wild, unpredictable frontier that surrounded it. With a population of just under 250,000 people, it was by far Alaska's largest city, yet it still felt small enough that everyone seemed to know someone who knew everyone else. The mountains framed the skyline, moose wandered into suburban yards, and winter storms could bury entire neighborhoods overnight. Life here demanded resilience, resourcefulness, and trust in your community. For many residents, especially families like the Craigs, Anchorage offered opportunity, jobs, schools, and a sense of independence. But beneath that quiet surface, there was an undercurrent of unease. Violent crime rates in Alaska were consistently higher than the national average through the late 1980s and early 1990s. Isolated highways, vast wilderness, and a transient population made the state both a haven and a hiding place. In those years, Anchorage police often dealt with cases that stretched their limited resources and tested their ability to find answers quickly. For young women like Bonnie Craig, the city represented both freedom and vulnerability. Walking to a bus stop or traveling alone early in the morning was normal. Anchorage wasn't thought of as unsafe. Still, stories of women attacked or disappearing occasionally made local headlines, and whispers of danger circulated through college campuses and workplaces. It was a time before cell phones were common, before personal safety apps, before DNA evidence became a reliable tool for justice. Cut to an interview reenactment, a retired Anchorage police officer sitting in a dimly lit interview room. Former officer, reenactment. In those days, we didn't have the technology we do now. We worked hard, but it was a different world. If you didn't have a witness or a confession, solving a case could take years, sometimes decades. Transition to another voice, a women's advocate or journalist from a period. Advocate, reenactment. There was a growing awareness about violence against women, but it wasn't where it is today. Survivors didn't always come forward. Families didn't always get answers. And the justice system, it often moved painfully slow. At the time of Bonnie's disappearance in 1994, forensic science was still evolving. The National DNA Database, known as CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, had been created by the FBI in 1990, but it wasn't yet fully implemented or widely accessible. Many local police departments, including those in Alaska, were just beginning to understand how DNA could change investigations. Evidence that might solve a case years later often sat in storage, waiting for science to catch up. In a world without digital records, modern surveillance, or advanced forensic tools, solving a murder depended heavily on old-fashioned detective work, knocking on doors, chasing leads, and hoping that someone, somewhere saw something. For Anchorage, the 1990s were a time of quiet growth, but also of hidden dangers. And in that landscape of cold mornings and long nights, the disappearance of Bonnie Craig would soon expose how fragile safety could be, even in a place where everyone thought they knew each other. The day Bonnie disappeared, September 28, 1994. Anchorage awoke under a gray morning sky, the kind of fall day when frost clung to windshields and the air carried the sharp promise of winter. It was just after 7 o'clock when 18-year-old Bonnie Craig left her home on Lake Otis Parkway. She was heading to her morning math class at the University of Alaska Anchorage, following a routine she knew by heart. Bonnie planned to take the city bus, just as she always did. Her mother, Karen Craig, heard the door close and assumed her daughter would return later that afternoon, never imagining it would be the last time she would see her alive. The streets were calm and still that morning, quiet in the way only Anchorage can be before the city fully wakes. Bonnie's walk to the bus stop was familiar, lined with birch trees, suburban homes, and the hum of distant traffic. Friends and classmates described her as punctual and careful, someone who preferred being early rather than taking chances with time. But on this particular morning, something inexplicable happened. She never made it to class. As the day went on, hours passed without a word. Karen tried not to worry at first. She told herself that Bonnie might have stayed late at school or missed the bus home. But when evening came and the phone stayed silent, that worry grew into fear. She began calling friends, classmates, and anyone who might have seen her daughter, but no one had. Bonnie had simply vanished. By nightfall, desperation set in. Karen Craig picked up the phone and reported her daughter missing to the Anchorage Police Department. It was a call made with trembling hands and a mother's intuition that something was terribly wrong. In 1994, police procedures for missing adults often began slowly. There were no cell phones to track, no social media to check, and few immediate tools available to investigators. At first, authorities hoped that Bonnie had gone somewhere voluntarily. But Karen knew her daughter. She was responsible, steady, and considerate. Something about this disappearance felt deeply wrong. That night, Karen couldn't sit still. She called hospitals, police dispatchers, and friends over and over again, hoping for any sign that Bonnie was safe. Volunteers began to walk the routes between her home and the university, searching bus stops, wooded trails, and roadside ditches. The hours dragged by in silence. Anchorage, with all its open wilderness and winding roads, suddenly felt vast and unforgiving, as if the city itself had swallowed her whole. Inside the Craig home, the clock ticked louder with each passing hour. Every ring of the phone brought a surge of hope followed by dread. Karen tried to rest, but couldn't. The uncertainty was unbearable, the kind of helpless waiting that only a parent of a missing child can understand. Outside, the cold deepened as night fell again over Anchorage. Somewhere, out there in the dark, the truth of what happened to Bonnie Craig remained hidden. September 28th began like any other day, a bus ride, a math class, and a return home by afternoon. But by the end of that night, it was clear that something unimaginable had occurred. Bonnie Craig was gone, and her disappearance would mark the beginning of one of Anchorage's most haunting mysteries. The discovery. 2 days after Bonnie Craig vanished, Anchorage woke to chilling news. On the morning of September 30th, 1994, a pair of hikers traveling near McHugh Creek along the Seward Highway came across something that would change the course of the investigation forever. McHugh Creek is a rugged, scenic area about 10 miles south of Anchorage, a place known for steep cliffs, icy waterfalls, and trails overlooking Tinnigan Arm. That day it was quiet, the air heavy with fog and salt from the sea. As the hikers moved along a narrow path, they noticed something in the distance near the base of a rocky slope. At first, they thought it might be debris or discarded clothing. But as they approached, the awful truth became clear. It was a body, a young woman. Authorities were called immediately, and the site was soon cordoned off by state troopers. The terrain was difficult to navigate, cold and slippery, forcing investigators to move carefully. The body was later identified as Bonnie Craig. Forensic examination confirmed that she had suffered blunt force trauma to the head and injuries consistent with a fall from a significant height. Her clothing and the condition of the scene also indicated that she had been sexually assaulted before her death. Investigators believed she may have been killed elsewhere and her body dumped at McHugh Creek or possibly thrown from the cliffs above. The evidence pointed to a violent assault and a deliberate attempt to conceal the crime. For the Anchorage Police Department and the Alaska State Troopers, this discovery transformed a missing persons case into a homicide investigation. Detectives worked long hours, searching for footprints, tire tracks, or any trace of physical evidence left behind. But the terrain was unforgiving. Rain and coastal winds had already washed away much of what might have been there. The early 1990s offered limited forensic tools. DNA testing existed, but it was slow, expensive, and often inconclusive without a known suspect for comparison. At the Craig home, Karen received the news that no mother should ever hear. Her daughter, the girl she had raised, encouraged, and loved with every part of her, was gone. Friends remember her collapsing in disbelief, unable to understand how something so brutal could happen in a city she had always trusted. The reality of loss settled in like the Alaskan winter, heavy, cold, and impossible to escape. News of the discovery spread quickly through Anchorage. For a city of its size, the murder of a college student struck deeply. People locked their doors earlier, walked less alone, and whispered about danger hiding in plain sight. For detectives, it became a race against time to find whoever was responsible before they could vanish into the wilderness or the crowd. As the investigation began, one question echoed through Anchorage. How could this have happened to someone like Bonnie Craig? She wasn't reckless or naive. She was careful, responsible, and loved. Her death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a wake-up call. The city that had always felt small and safe suddenly seemed darker. McHugh Creek would never be the same again. The place once known for its beauty became a symbol of heartbreak. The site where one family's world was shattered and where a mystery began that would take nearly 17 years to unravel. The investigation begins. In the days following the discovery of Bonnie Craig's body, the Anchorage Police Department and Alaska State Troopers launched a full-scale investigation. Detectives retraced her final known steps, beginning from her home on Lake Otis Parkway to the nearby bus stop where she was last believed to have been seen. They canvassed neighborhoods, interviewed classmates from the University of Alaska Anchorage, and questioned local bus drivers and commuters who might have recognized her that morning. Posters went up across the city, Bonnie's photo, her age, and the date she went missing, a plea for anyone who had seen something, no matter how small. Yet no one came forward with a credible lead. There are no confirmed witnesses who saw Bonnie board the bus or arrive on campus. No neighbors recalled seeing her after she left home. The investigation was already facing one of the most difficult realities in missing person cases. There was a gap in time, and no one could account for it. Somewhere between home and class, Bonnie vanished, and the silence surrounding that window made the truth even harder to find. Investigators collected every possible piece of physical evidence from the McHugh Creek site: clothing fibers, soil samples, and biological material. Some of the evidence was sent to forensic labs for testing, but in 1994, DNA analysis was still in its infancy. The National CODIS database had only just been established, and it would take years before Alaska began routinely submitting genetic profiles. At the time, forensic work relied largely on serology, the study of blood types and enzymes, techniques that could confirm the presence of biological material but rarely identify a specific individual. Visuals: detectives marking off the rocky area near McHugh Creek with yellow tape. Evidence technicians carefully packaging items. Lab technicians in white coats handling samples under fluorescent lights. With limited technology, investigators turned back to traditional police work: hundreds of interviews, background checks, and attempts to connect the case to any known offenders in the area. But despite the scale of their efforts, nothing led to a suspect. Anchorage police officers described the case as one of the most challenging of the decade: a crime scene isolated by nature, an attack without witnesses, and evidence that technology couldn't yet interpret. Insert a reenacted interview. A retired state trooper recalling the frustration. "We were doing everything we could with what we had," he says, "but the science just wasn't there yet. We collected evidence hoping that someday, somehow, technology would catch up." The Craig family continued to cooperate closely with authorities, holding on to hope that answers would come. Karen Craig refused to let her daughter's case fade from memory. She spoke with investigators regularly, urged media coverage, and stayed in contact with other families of missing or murdered women in Alaska. Her determination became a quiet force behind the investigation, a mother's strength holding steady against time. Weeks turned into months, and then years. Each lead went nowhere, and each suspect was cleared. Despite exhaustive efforts from law enforcement, investigators were unable to identify a suspect. The case soon went cold. Anchorage moved forward, but for those who knew Bonnie Craig, time did not heal. It only deepened the ache of unanswered questions. The evidence was stored, preserved in case the day would come when science could speak for Bonnie, when what had been collected by hand and sealed in envelopes might finally reveal the face of her killer. The case goes cold. As the years slipped by, the file labeled Bonnie Craig, homicide, 1994 began to gather dust in the Anchorage Police Department archives. Inside were photographs, interview transcripts, and sealed evidence bags, fragments of a story frozen in time. Each document yellowed slightly with age, a reminder of a case that had once consumed investigators but slowly drifted into silence. The newspapers that once bore Bonnie's picture on their front pages faded to gray, tucked away in drawers or bundled in stacks marked for storage. Outside the walls of the station, Anchorage moved forward. The city grew, technology advanced, and faces changed within the police department. Seasons came and went. Snow piled over the streets each winter, melted away in spring, and returned again. But for Karen Craig, time did not bring peace. Her daughter's absence was a wound that never healed. Through the late 1990s and into the early 2000s, Karen refused to let the world forget Bonnie's name. She stayed in regular contact with detectives, calling for updates, asking questions, and pushing for progress even when there was little to report. Each time the phone rang from an unknown number, she braced herself for news, good or bad. That never seemed to come. Detectives who worked on the case recalled Karen's quiet persistence, her determination to keep the investigation alive despite the growing odds against it. Anchorage winters became a kind of backdrop to her grief, long, dark, and unforgiving. She spoke to local newspapers and television reporters, sharing Bonnie's story whenever the opportunity arose. Karen appeared on local news segments, her voice steady but emotional, urging police and the public not to let the case fade into the past. "Someone out there knows what happened," she told viewers in one interview. "And someone out there needs to come forward." Visuals fade from grainy 1990s footage. Police cruisers parked under heavy snow, old typewriters clicking in dimly lit offices, to the early 2000s where detectives now work at newer desks, reviewing digital case files. A new generation of officers joins the force, inheriting a list of cold cases that includes Bonnie's name. Though leads have long gone silent, her file remains active, marked unsolved, but never forgotten. For Karen, life became a balance between grief and advocacy. She continued to reach out to lawmakers, attend victim support events, and meet with cold case investigators. Her mission was simple but powerful: to make sure Bonnie's story stayed alive until the truth was finally uncovered. Years turned into a decade, and the world around her changed. Cell phones, email, and forensic science began to evolve rapidly. For Karen Craig, that evolution was a glimmer of hope. Somewhere in a sealed evidence envelope collected in 1994, she believed the truth still existed. All it needed was the right technology and the right moment to speak. The DNA revolution, a new hope. By the turn of the millennium, a quiet revolution was reshaping criminal investigations across America. What had once been invisible, traces of skin cells, a single strand of hair, a microscopic drop of blood, was now becoming the key to solving even decades-old mysteries. Forensic science was entering a new era. In the late 1990s, DNA profiling evolved from a rare laboratory experiment into one of law enforcement's most powerful tools. As the science advanced, so did the systems built to support it. The FBI's combined DNA index system, known as CODIS, was gradually being rolled out nationwide. It allowed investigators in Alaska, Maine, or any other state to compare genetic evidence across thousands of databases, linking crimes that once seemed worlds apart. Visuals fade through time. Technicians in early labs working under dim fluorescent lights, computers with green monitors displaying genetic codes, and later, modern forensic labs glowing under sterile blue light. The scene transitions to Anchorage detectives revisiting cold case evidence from the 1990s, including sealed envelopes from Bonnie Craig's 1994 murder investigation. Inside one of them, DNA evidence had been carefully preserved, even as the case grew cold. By 2011, that DNA was reanalyzed using modern techniques. The results were loaded into the National CODIS database, a routine step that suddenly became extraordinary. A match appeared. The name that surfaced had never before been linked to the Craig case. Kenneth Dion, a man then serving time in a Maine prison for unrelated crimes. When the Anchorage Police Department received the notification, it was a moment of disbelief and vindication all at once. 17 years after Bonnie's murder, science had finally found the needle in the haystack. As Anchorage Police Lieutenant Dave Parker later explained to reporters, it was one of those moments where you could feel the air change in the room. Everyone knew this was it. This was Bonnie's case. Investigators immediately reopened the file. Alaska prosecutors and the Alaska State Troopers coordinated with law enforcement in Maine to confirm the match and begin extradition procedures. The DNA evidence was cross-checked, verified, and reviewed under new forensic standards. The result was conclusive. The genetic profile recovered from a 1994 crime scene belonged to Kenneth Dion. Anchorage Assistant District Attorney Adrian Bachman later stated, "Without modern DNA technology, this case may never have been solved." It's a testament to the persistence of investigators and the advancements in science that gave Bonnie Craig and her family the justice they waited for so long. For the Craig family, the news was both devastating and relieving. After nearly 2 decades of uncertainty, they finally had a name, a face, connected to the unimaginable loss they had endured since that cold September morning in 1994. As the camera pans over the snowy Seward Highway, where Bonnie was found years earlier, the narration slows. For 17 years, the evidence sat silent, but it never forgot. In 2011, science finally spoke, and with it came the first real hope for justice: the arrest and trial of Kenneth Dion. In 2011, the DNA match that stunned investigators in Anchorage set off a chain of events stretching nearly 4,000 miles across the country. The man identified by the CODIS database, Kenneth Dion, was a former Army medic who had lived in Alaska during the 1990s before moving east. At the time of the match, he was serving time in a Maine state prison for unrelated assault and burglary charges. Anchorage detectives coordinated with Maine authorities to confirm his identity and secure a warrant for his arrest in connection with Bonnie Craig's 1994 murder. When confronted, Dion denied any involvement, insisting he had never met Bonnie and had no idea how his DNA could have been found. After months of legal process, Dion was extradited to Alaska, arriving in Anchorage under heavy security. The reopening of the case captured statewide attention. For the Craig family, seeing a suspect finally charged after nearly 2 decades brought a mixture of heartbreak and relief. Karen Craig told reporters outside the courthouse, "It doesn't bring Bonnie back, but it means the truth is finally being heard." The trial began in early 2015 in Anchorage Superior Court. Prosecutors laid out the case methodically. The preserved evidence from 1994, the DNA analysis linking Dion to semen recovered from Bonnie's body, and the testimony of forensic experts who confirmed that the genetic profile matched Dion's with statistical certainty. Assistant District Attorney Adrian Bachman told jurors, "The science doesn't lie. The evidence in this case has waited 17 years to speak, and now it does." Dion's defense attorneys countered aggressively, arguing that the chain of custody of the evidence had been mishandled over the years and that contamination could not be ruled out. They questioned the reliability of the early DNA testing and the integrity of the state crime lab. Dion himself took the stand, maintaining his innocence and claiming he was being framed by an unreliable system. Over the following weeks, jurors heard testimony from investigators, forensic scientists, and members of the Craig family. The prosecution emphasized that the DNA evidence was overwhelming and that Dion had no alibi, placing him elsewhere at the time of the crime. They also reminded jurors that Dion had lived in Anchorage in the early 1990s, less than 5 miles from where Bonnie was last seen. After several days of deliberation, the jury returned to a packed courtroom. On June 15, 2015, Kenneth Dion was found guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. Gasps filled the courtroom as the verdict was read. Karen Craig, holding a photograph of Bonnie, wept quietly as the judge thanked the jury for their service. In his closing statement at sentencing, the judge told Dion, "Your actions were brutal, senseless, and left a wound on this community that will never fully heal." Dion received a sentence of 124 years in prison, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. For the Craig family, the verdict marked the end of a 21-year pursuit of justice. Outside the courthouse, Karen Craig addressed reporters once more. "It's been a long, painful road, but today my daughter's voice was finally heard." As the scene fades, the camera pans over the Anchorage skyline, snow falling softly, the Chugach Mountains in the distance, while the narration concludes, "In 1994, a young woman vanished on her way to class. In 2015, her killer was finally held accountable. Justice may have come late, but it came because truth, like DNA, endures through time. Justice, questions, and closure." When a verdict was read in June 2015, a wave of emotion rippled through the Anchorage courtroom. For Karen Craig, it was the moment she had prayed for over 2 decades to see: justice at last for her daughter Bonnie. Standing before reporters outside the courthouse, her voice trembled with both relief and sorrow. "I'm thankful to the investigators and prosecutors who never gave up," she said. "But no sentence, no verdict can bring my daughter back. There's no real closure. Only peace in knowing that the man who hurt her can't do this to anyone else." Those words echoed through the Anchorage community. For years, Bonnie's story had symbolized both tragedy and perseverance, a reminder of a young woman whose future was stolen, but whose case refused to be forgotten. Local newspapers ran headlines describing the conviction as "justice long deferred, finally delivered." Residents who had followed the story since 1994 expressed relief that Alaska's justice system had prevailed even after 21 years of waiting. In the days following the trial, Anchorage police officials publicly credited advances in DNA science for breaking open one of the state's most haunting cold cases. Detectives acknowledged that the Craig investigation helped reinforce the value of preserving biological evidence, no matter how long a case remains unsolved. One investigator noted, "This case showed that DNA doesn't forget. Even decades later, the truth can still be found." The impact went beyond one family's tragedy. Bonnie Craig's case became a turning point in Alaska's broader commitment to funding and expanding DNA testing in cold cases. Following the conviction, the state renewed efforts to audit and test older evidence, ensuring that no potential lead would be lost to time or neglect. Forensic specialists in Anchorage credited the persistence of the Craig family, and Karen in particular, for inspiring renewed public trust in science-driven justice. Still, for those closest to Bonnie, questions lingered. Why did it take so long? Could her life have been saved if different systems were in place back then? The documentary returns to Karen's quiet reflection. Justice came, but it came too late. What I want now is for no other mother to wait this long. The screen fades to present day, the Alaskan landscape stretching beneath pale winter light. Snow covers McHugh Creek, still and silent. The same place where the truth once hid beneath the surface for 17 years. Kenneth Dion remains incarcerated at Goose Creek Correctional Center in Alaska. As the final images roll, family photos of Bonnie smiling beside her mother, shots of the University of Alaska campus, and a sunset over the Chugach Mountains. The narration concludes softly. Bonnie Craig's life was short, but her story changed the way Alaska pursues justice. Through science, perseverance, and a mother's unshakable love, her voice was never truly silenced.